Rock, Country Joe, Crosby, Stills, Nash, Richie, Jimi Hendrix, and John Sebastian, Shania Sly, and the Family Stone, The Who.
Hi, I'm Deborah Holchip, editor of Michigan Today. In this episode of Listen in Michigan, we're setting the Wayback Machine to August 1969 and revisiting Woodstock, both the festival and the film. The iconic event, which, as the first of its kind, attracted some 500,000 people for a multi-day extravaganza, continues to fascinate music fans and cultural observers, the ones who were there, the ones who couldn't get there, and the ones who weren't even born yet. And thanks to the Oscar-winning documentary that appeared in March 1970, we can all go back to Max Yasgur's farm in upstate New York, where the concert took place, whenever we so desire. In August, a bunch of specials came out celebrating the concert's 50th anniversary, seeking as ever to convey the mythic and magical energy that transformed this potentially catastrophic and financially disastrous concert. No one expected more than 400,000 people to show up, into a historic manifestation of one generation's quest for love and peace. Somehow, it all turned out okay. My guest today is Mark Clague, an associate professor of musicology at U of M's School of Music, Theater, and Dance. Mark is incredibly accomplished, and he's a brilliant historian with recent projects focusing on the Star-Spangled Banner, Jimi Hendrix, anyone? And the music of George and Ira Gershwin, among many, many other things. It was so fun to talk to him about American history, especially American music history, and get his take on Woodstock the Festival and Woodstock the Film. Here's Mark.
History is really a bunch of stories we tell about ourselves, right? So, and we can sort of change the emphasis. You know, we can put in details, we can take details out. There's a lot of ways in which history really tells us more about the present, than it tells us about the past. And I do think there are some connections to the contemporary moment, just about the sort of the polarization, sort of about wanting to go back and wanting to go forward, sort of the fear of diversity,
of
right?
The other.
Of all, these people who don't think and do what I do. So there is a way in which Woodstock, sort of represents a choice to work together as opposed to battle it out.
Yeah.
And, there's something instructive in this moment.
For those of you who have forgotten, for those of you who haven't forgotten, and for those of you who never knew.
By the time we got to
Woodstock, an incredible film about an incredible event, is back.
One of the interesting things about Woodstock the festival is I don't think we would probably remember it much at all without Woodstock the film, right? So the 1970 film comes out in March, about 8 months or so after the actual event, and it really sort of saves the festival, not only in cultural memory, but literally monetarily, right? Because the festival lost all sorts of money, there were all sorts of lawsuits, it was a big mess. But the film was a sort of runaway success, and it's sort of bizarre for a documentary to be a runaway hit, right? It won the Academy Award for documentary that year. And
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and it was nominated for like 4 or 5 others for sound editing, for visual editing, and it's a cool film. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting things about it. One of the things today is that there really are sort of 3 main versions. There's the original theatrical release from 1970, which is about 3 hours long. There's the 25th anniversary version, which adds about another 40 minutes.
Oh, okay.
And then there's the 40th anniversary edition, which adds like, I don't know, sounds like it's 5.5 hours long or something like that. And then, I think probably with the 50th anniversary, we'll have, these super collections of every little, bip and bop and picture and audio track that we can have. So it has sort of expanded in importance over time, whereas, most times history we forget things, and this is sort of a deeper and deeper memorialization, but it happens really because of the film.
Yeah, it's amazing that they were able to capture what they did and in such good quality for what a crazy experience it was. I mean,
the film was pretty much a shoestring operation too. They didn't even pay the cinematographers. I mean, it was sort of a double or nothing contract. Like if you came and you worked the film, and they had this big crew of like 100 people, but nobody was going to be paid at all unless the film was a success, and then they would be paid sort of double standard rates. So worked out for them. But
Yeah.
I
all
wonder
very
too
risky.
if I mean, this is a pretty early days of the stadium rock concert, and of course this is not a stadium, this is a hog farm, right? So sort of a natural bowl in the sort of geography that created a space for not only the pond for skinny dipping, which was important for hygiene there after a couple days in the mud, but also just for acoustically. And you know, you really didn't have standard like amplifier setups and speaker setups. I mean, this is pretty early in these days of these mega rock concerts. We had Monterey Pop in 1967, and
Yeah.
Woodstock is the next one, and then Altamont is sort of the third of the big three, and they all had very different results. And I think, you know, one of the things about Woodstock, it was this impending disaster that was sort of saved by community participation. I mean, they expected about 200,000 people. They pre-sold about 186,000 tickets, expected to sell a few at the gate, and then 400,000 plus people show up. And they literally didn't have time to finish the setup because Woodstock was supposed to happen. Well, Woodstock didn't actually happen in Woodstock, right? It happens in Bethel, New York, on Max Yasgur's farm, but it was supposed to happen at a different venue entirely, and a lot of the preparatory work and the lighting design and everything had been done with this previous venue, and they passed a law, you know, like at the last minute saying you couldn't have a gathering of more than 5,000 people, and so that they had to find this alternative venue, and they literally had to decide, like, are we going to finish the fence and the ticket booth, or are we going to finish the stage? And they decided that the stage was probably more important, because if people had actually paid to get in, they would have been sort of angry not to have a concert, since that was the whole point. So it is pretty much a sort of a miraculous event, but it really was about people pulling together, because you didn't have enough food, you didn't, you know, just communications. I mean, nobody had cell phones in the days, right?
Yeah.
So it's like there's like one payphone for the whole place, right?
It's really amazing, man. It looks like some kind of biblical, epical, unbelievable scene.
Woodstock, with a cast of 500,000 outrageously friendly people.
Like, I can't imagine those people were so far away. Like, what's even happening? Can you even hear anything?
I know that's actually one of the things I think about it. I think probably the experience of the festival on the film is probably better than having actually been there, because, like, you know, they didn't have jumbotrons in 1969. And, you know, so you were basically way in the distance looking practically through binoculars to see the stage. And yet the cinematography is really riveting, because they had 16 different cameras, and they're like right in the face of every artist. And so you really feel like you're practically in the band. You're really performing right alongside. And you get this kind of intense, intimate, personal, you know, experience of this sort of high wattage musical performance.
It really was like a high wire act. I mean, from everything you've described already, with the outrageous crowds and the traffic and the finances, and then you throw in the weather and all these egos and all these artists, and it's the first time anything like this magnitude has ever happened. And you are right there with them in the movie. Like, what disaster is going to happen next, you know? When it starts raining and they've got all that gear and everything. Ugh, so scary.
And that's, I think, an interesting part of the film, too, is it's really just as much about the making of the festival and the people's, you know, the local community's response, and the concertgoers' response, and the organizers', you know, thoughts and feelings. I mean, they interview the guy who, you know, puts together the porta potties, right? For I mean, they talk to everybody. So you really, it's sort of a 360-degree, you know, kind of look of the festival. It's not just about the concert. Probably only maybe 2/3 of the movie is really the performances, and everything else are the people.
Yeah.
And so it really is a sort of a document of a cultural moment rather than of a concert.
Yeah, it definitely shows, you know, the potential. It revealed the potential for creating a mass spectacle like this. Like, a how to or how not to, I guess, you know. But prior to that, like Monterey, I don't know how big that was, and then Altamont was such a disaster.
Right.
I mean, such a tragedy and everything. Like,
well, and the violence at Altamont is what people feared at Woodstock, and it was the fact that violence didn't happen
was so shocking.
And you know, part of it was if you look at like the initial news reports, the UPI release, I mean, it's like disaster at Woodstock, all these people, it's, you know, it's public health nightmare, you know, don't come, traffic jam, stay away, you know, people are going to die. It's, you know, New York State thought about calling out the National Guard, and, you know, just all of this fear. And part of it is fear of young people. I mean, it's really a moment in our history of generational conflict in the 1960s, and different attitudes about sort of love and drug use and sort of behavior and sort of community responsibility, and sort of coming off the Summer of Love and the whole sort of notion of the hippie, right, which is sort of informing this view. And you have to remember, it's a time like when 18-year-olds couldn't vote, although they could be drafted for the Vietnam War, right? So it's a particular moment and a sort of politically incendiary moment. And so there was a lot of fear by the establishment of what were these kids going to do. And so one of the sub-themes of the film is, wow, these kids are nice, and oh, they behaved, and they said thank you, and they were appreciative, and all this sort of affirmation of community values, and the surprise that people had that these young people were not, sort of violent, and that they were nice.
Yeah, peace and love,
Peace and love. And it seems to be that's sort of part of the story we're telling about it now. And so part of what I think makes Woodstock and the documentary so dramatic is that it's that shift from the disaster story to the peace and love, triumph. That really is what the movie's about.
The other thing that's kind of striking about the whole event is how self-aware it was. Like, they knew if we act like jerks, we're going to be cast as jerks.
The world is watching us.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And people kind of obeyed. Like, it's so weird. It's so hard to know what the magic was that created, and it almost turned into this myth-like experience. Like, was it really that good?
I mean, I think part of it was, using the publicity machine and the last-minute cancellation of this one venue is part of why people were so excited about it, and getting all of these different, musical acts, Jimi Hendrix headlining it, but, the Grateful Dead and Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Yeah, then you have all those iconic performances where it was...
Janis Joplin, just sort of amazing. Richie Havens ends up kicking the whole thing off, and that's, I think, part of the video. I mean, they do a great job of, even though it's really sort of fragmented and mixed up, it's a different order than the concert actually happened in, but you get a sense of the artist entering the stage, and then they usually show the very last, song that the artist performs. And you get that kind of climactic excitement, the real crescendo. You see sort of the moments of highest intensity in each one of the performances. And so that's pretty riveting.
And then, of course, we've talked about Hendrix before, but that's such an iconic moment of this iconic experience is Hendrix doing the Star-Spangled Banner. So, and people weren't quite sure how to interpret that, and there's so much more to it than people realize.
Yeah, no, I've become sort of obsessed with that performance and the anthem generally. But it really started for me with this film because I teach a course in American music, and one of the things I kick it off with every year is showing Hendrix at Woodstock and just sort of asking the students, what is this? Yeah. And what's interesting about that answer is that it's not just a yes or no, good or bad kind of answer. It's a complicated, mixed up answer, just like human life. So it's both patriotism and protest. I mean, he plays a pretty, sort of traditional version of the melody, playing all the notes, they're in time, they're in tune, but he's also doing these incredible sort of improvisatory pictorialisms, where he's doing sort of the psychedelic rock thing with the anthem. And if you hear it without saying the words to yourself as it goes through, you think, oh my gosh, he's like insulting the flag or he's tearing the anthem apart. But then you realize when you listen more closely that it's the words rocket would glare and bombs bursting in air, where he does these sort of firefight sounds of explosions and peals of bombs falling and sort of rising slides of screams and machine gun fire and sirens and all of this stuff, which really talks about, I think it's a kind of acoustic synthesis of the 1960s. I mean, you have the sort of, the riots in the streets and the war in Vietnam sort of brought to life in a way that then connects 1969 and I think the sort of battle for freedom with 1814 and Francis Scott Key watching the Battle of Baltimore and the defense of Fort McHenry, and a kind of different kind of heroism mainly, but is still where the future of the country is really at stake for the people who are there. And I think that's part of this kind of self-conscious awareness you talked about. And Hendrix is interesting because, with the Star-Spangled Banner, I mean, it really shouldn't have happened. I mean, they didn't rehearse the Star-Spangled Banner. It wasn't planned in the set list. Hendrix had already said, we're wrapping this up. He was playing his traditional concert under Voodoo Child's Slight Return. He had said, introduce the members of the band as you do in the last song, and they were just going to rock out and the concert was going to be over. And instead, he turns to the Star-Spangled Banner. And I think for him, it's a response to the optimism of the moment. I mean, he's in some ways synthesizing, the hope that Woodstock, gave to the people who were there because they saw the disaster become a triumph. A muddy triumph, but nevertheless something very different than the story that maybe the establishment was trying to tell about the danger of young people and the fact they had to be controlled. This was, the largest gathering, I think, for a concert ever at that point. And, it's joked that it's the third largest city in New York that weekend, because with the population. So it's, the fact that people pulled together, I think, gave a sign of, well, maybe, young people could not take this hippie impulse and not just sort of tune out, but actually sort of tune in to come back and create a new future. And the Woodstock film broadcast that message nationally. But I mean, the people who made the film were not getting paid initially. So they weren't there as a job. They were there because they wanted to be a part of it. And, their success or failure was really, the quality of the end result. They weren't just being hired to document it. They really sort of lived it in a certain way. And I think that comes across in the film. And the editing for me is, again, today probably doesn't look that fantastic from sort of an MTV perspective, right? Because we're used to all this fast cross-cutting.
Yeah, it's nice to have the camera hold still for a minute,
It's, it's pretty amazing. I mean, you'll be watching the singer from the left and the right side at exactly the same time, or else they'll have like the drummer in the middle of the screen and then the bass player and the guitar player on either side, and you're watching 3 camera views simultaneously. So it's sort of a kind of a Picasso cubist, fractured reality.
Yeah.
But you have sort of this kind of superhuman sight. You can see more than any one person could ever see.
Yeah.
So they apparently shot hundreds of miles of film. I mean, just like with 16 cameras running for 3 days, you can imagine that they, just
can only imagine what's on the cutting room floor, man.
Yeah, and it's one of the interesting things for me about like the Hendrix part. I mean, the Hendrix really, he was closing the film and it sort of climaxes, I think, on the Star Spangled Banner in a certain way. But one of the interesting things about it is that that particular part of the film is not split screen. I mean, you just see one camera. And, by that part of the festival, only a couple cameras were working and they didn't have that much film left, So they sort of got forced into what became a very compelling artistic decision to not have the frenetic cutting and multiple perspectives, but to really just focus. Because, the Woodstock anthem that Hendrix does is almost just one long continuous shot.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to have to revisit.
It's an interesting film, too, because it has a little bit of that kind of cinema verite kind of aspect, where they're just sort of filming. There's not a lot of dialogue. There's not a sort of omniscient narrator who's telling you what to think. It's really a lot of question and answer with people who are there, was allowing the subject to speak rather than sort of telling everybody what to think about it. I think on the same time, it's a very manipulative film, right? I mean, it is sort of putting this positive spin on it. It's showing the controversy, but it, like the mud. There's this point where there's like this big slip and slide, right? They have all the mud, and people are just playing in it, right? They're just reveling in the disaster.
Yeah. What else are you going to do?
There seems to be sort of a conscious choice to interpret it in a different way. But the film is definitely a cultural product, as an artistic product, but also a propaganda product on a certain level, like all
documentaries, I guess. I mean, they all have a point of view. Sometimes they're a little more hidden than others.
Live performance is different than a recording, and so the film is somewhere in between, because it's a recorded document of a live event. But you hear the stage banter, you hear what people are saying and how they're introducing and what they're saying in between songs, and Hendrix actually sort of dedicates an earlier song in his set to guys in the military who are thinking about their girlfriends, and he again, he's sort of representing them as people who have relationships, and they have loves, and they have a life to live, and there's a kind of sensitivity to that. At the same time, I don't think Hendrix loved the military. He fakes being gay to get discharged so he can pursue his musical career. So, but I do think you have a pretty complex political thinker. I think we tend to think of the hippie culture is sort of as completely drugged out and disengaged, but it's actually quite engaged. And I think one way in which you see that with Hendrix is how he uses the anthem as a kind of sonic snapshot of the moment in time. So the Woodstock film has so overshadowed every other, sort of historical document from this era that we think of it as a singular moment. But all of these musicians played the same music other places. You know,
so he played that anthem quite a bit.
Dozens of times, maybe 70 plus times, and every time it was different. It was never exactly the same. And so there's something about Woodstock with the insertion of the taps quotation, which of course honors sort of military sacrifice, but also the way he holds the sort of the note of the word free at the very end for like 6 full seconds, which for me, you know, there's a kind of holding on and emphasis of that notion that, you know, here at Woodstock we're free. We've literally created our own world, and we've come together, and this is the kind of freedom that America's about.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's just profoundly American.
Yeah, there is, I think, a tendency to feel disempowered these days. When you look back at like just campus culture in the 1960s and the Port Huron Statement and Students for a Democratic Society, and, you know, part of the fear of all these kids getting together for a rock concert was the political activism that had been a prelude to that. So, you know, for me, in some ways, I think of Woodstock as a kind of capstone on the 60s, more so than, it didn't sort of much, wasn't the start of something as much as it was the kind of summary of something. And
wow, that's an interesting thought. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, I mean, Hendrix, the Star Spangled Banner wasn't so much, you know, like a rocketing protest. People already hated the Vietnam War. You know,
that's true.
It wasn't, you know, the Tet Offensive had been several years earlier, and that's really when public opinion shifted. So you know, but it's, and I think if there's a sad thing about Woodstock, yeah, it is that it was more of the almost the final chapter rather than the beginning. So tapping into that notion of sort of the power of the collective, the fact that the community can come together and do its own thing, I mean, might be something we have to learn from that.
Well, thanks so much for listening. I saw the movie for the first time in Quebec City when I was just 13. I was visiting my brother there, and this was the only film in English in the entire town. I must say it left quite an impression. I am married to a musician, after all. Anyway, come back next time when I speak to Tiffany Eng, the University Carillonneur who plays the bells in the Burton and Lurie Towers here. And don't forget to subscribe to Listen in Michigan at Google Play Music, iTunes, TuneIn, and Stitcher. And if you're at iTunes, give us a rating. Make it a good one, too, okay? Find us at michigantoday.umich.edu under the podcast tab. Till next time, as always, go Blue.